Ambition, ambition, ambition.
Hi, everybody.
Good day, everybody.
I think everyone must just be getting used to your little intros there.
Probably. No, but
Let's hope so.
It's always such joy to do my ambition. So I think I just want to express it every single time.
Yeah, you're always excited about it. Hi, everyone. It's Alex.
And Tiffany.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. And today we have a wonderful guest. We're joined by Dr. Anne Welsh. Woohoo! I'll tell you guys a bit more about Dr. Anne. So she's a Harvard trained psychologist, an executive coach, and mother of 4 who's dedicated her career to empowering working parents. With over 15 years of experience, she combines academic research with real-world insights to help both individuals and organizations navigate the challenges of working parenthood. Dr. Welsh is a recognized expert on work-life integration, women's leadership development, and the transition to working parenthood. And we are thrilled to have her share her wisdom with us today. Yay! Welcome.
Hello.
I'm so excited to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. Yeah, I think a great place to start was, I remember you spoke about your mom. I think you were saying that she was like the real embodiment of ambition. So yeah, tell us more about her and the role she played in your life in parenting and motherhood.
Yeah, for sure. So my mom was a doctor, which was really rare for me growing up as a kid in the 80s. And I have even more respect for that now, kind of as an adult looking backwards, right? She graduated medical school in 1969. She was the youngest graduate of her medical school ever. So she was young on top of being a woman. And she was one of 10 in a class of 300 students. And, I look back and I think, wow, what a trailblazer. And she never I don't think she saw herself that way. She was just passionate about her work and kind of felt like it was a calling. And she navigated being a mom to 4 kids and being a doctor. And it's kind of phenomenal looking back at how she was able to do that. And I think one thing that's important to point out historically, especially as we talk these days about dual working couples, is that my father was also a doctor, so they both had big jobs, but my dad was also a really involved parent, which again was really rare in the 1980s. Like, he had every Tuesday off, and on Tuesdays he did dinner. I mean, a lot of times it was takeout, but he did dinner. He took us to dentist appointments and doctor's appointments and whatever on Tuesdays. So there was this real kind of shared labor that was also a really good role model for me growing up. And so, as an adult now, I think that I'm really lucky to have had that, to have seen that when a lot of kids at my age didn't have that experience.
Yeah, because so many people replicate their parents, sort of the way they did parenting, don't they? So if you've had that, I guess that example, did you realize that was different at the time, or did you just take it for granted?
I think for the most part, I took it for granted. I mean, I knew that it was different that my mom worked. A lot of my friends had mothers who were at home, or it was maybe at least that it was different that she worked at such like a big job. But in terms of my dad's involvement, I had no idea that was different. And it was only once I became an adult and kind of talked to other people about their parenting and maybe became a little bit more aware of the world around me that I recognized, like, oh, that was really a pretty unique experience as a kid.
Wow, I like that. Now, I'd love to know more about your work, and especially how you transitioned from working. I remember you said during the introduction that it was when you had your second child that your career changed. Now you looked at your career. I'd love to delve more into that, and also for the benefit of our audience, you might be experiencing a similar shift.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think because of my own role model and my mom, I always thought I'm going to work. It like never occurred to me that I would want to do anything else. And she kind of made it look easy. So I went into it thinking, little did I know. And so I had done research on the transition to motherhood as my graduate research. I started looking at this period, and that was long before I had any kids. And so when I had kids, I thought I like many of us do, I thought I was going to be able to figure it out and it would be fine. And I had my first, and I went back to work at 6 weeks, and that was really challenging, but I was doing okay. And it was when I had my second where I said, you know what, I am not able to do the work that I want to do and show up as the clinician that I want to be in this kind of full-time, very high intensity capacity. I was at Harvard at the time, and then also show up for a toddler and a baby at home. This isn't really working. And so at that point, I simply just asked for some flexibility. I went to the manager and I said, here's a couple options. Could I do 80%? Another clinician and I suggested a job share and worked it out how that, kind of gave a presentation of how that could work. Could I figure out one day a week at home? Something needed to give. And the response was kind of a blanket no. It was, we don't have the capacity for this. There are a million other people waiting for your job. It was a little bit of like, we're Harvard, take it or leave it. And so I left. And that kind of started me down this whole other path that I never anticipated. And it's been wonderful, but it was definitely not what I expected. At that point, I started my own private practice just for therapy initially. And since then, it's kind of ballooned into lots of other things, all focused on supporting working mothers in particular. So my therapy practice is perinatal mental health. My executive coaching practices, working mothers. And then, in more recent years, I've also started to do some consulting around how companies can support working parents. And that was really born out of the individual work and seeing how so many of these women were struggling with the same things again and again and again. And it wasn't an individual problem, it was a systems problem. And so while there's a lot I can do individually, and I love that work, I felt like I had to do something else, right? I had to start addressing these systemic issues in some way, and kind of create more multifaceted support for working moms.
Is that like the what you're doing with Phoebe? I noticed.
Yeah. So I recently partnered with Phoebe, and I'm really excited about their work. They are kind of the premier support for working parents, and they provide support from pregnancy all the way through working parenthood, right? So it's not just one piece of the puzzle. It's really that whole lifetime of being a working parent. And through that, we do workshops, we do group coaching, we do trainings for management, and there's also a lot of resource connection, especially through that pregnancy and early postpartum period with lactation support, pediatricians, sleep consultants, right? All that extra stuff that helps allow you to show up as a working parent, because you're getting kind of that village that we were all promised and doesn't really exist unless someone helps us find it.
That's amazing. I think, Tiffany and I both had our kids during the pandemic, but we were quite lucky because we had a friend who had set up a little Facebook chat between people who were already mothers. So during the times that we were thinking, oh my God, is it normal for this baby to feed for 3 hours? We could reach out to somebody and ask, and we would get a response back from one of our friends. But like you say, the village isn't there for everybody. We were lucky that we had that, despite it being the pandemic and not being able to go to groups. And I think what you say about that, needing that village and needing that care all around motherhood, they're the bits that actually help you to keep the plate spinning, aren't they? To have that input from other people, like you said, the lactation support around sleep, all of that kind of thing, that I think pre-motherhood, you just have no idea that you are going to go through all of these different things. I really liked as well, we talked when we met you before about your research into transitions and, where the opportunity for growth is in that. And do you work with women on, using that opportunity for growth as well?
Yeah, completely. Right. So I think the thing that drew me to researching motherhood and that specific transition was just an interest in transitions, right? In how do we go from one thing to another and grow out of it or expand our identity. And so initially I was looking at the transition to college because that's an easy one to study when you're in a university setting. But the transition to motherhood was not studied at all within the field of psychology. I mean, this was 20 years ago when I first started it. And I think that's been the thing that's kind of continued to hold my fascination through all of the different layers of work, is that growth. When we have a kid, the brain expands. Obviously not literally, but essentially there's a huge period of synaptic growth. You form all sorts of new neural connections. And it's amazing when you stop to think about it. And this happens for birthing parents and non-birthing parents. It's not just moms, right? Dads, it happens for adoptive parents, right? When you bring a child into the home, your brain kind of knows that it has to be able to read signals differently and make connections differently. And so there's this neural opportunity for growth. And when we recognize that and kind of lean into it and appreciate it, then we can move through this really tough transition and gain so much from it. And that's where I'm so passionate about the corporate work too, right? Is when companies and organizations recognize that, then they can help their employees hone it, and they start to see the value of supporting working parents.
I like that. And I think that's hopefully the message our audience also get from Ambition, because that's what we're trying to talk about here. And I don't think that's not to say that we don't recognize that motherhood comes with challenges of juggling. Obviously, you have less time, you have less sleep, less time for yourself, but there's an opportunity in that, because so clearly human beings don't make the most of the time. I think it's, as you become a mother, I personally seen how I've transitioned in terms of, number one, respecting my time more and sort of using my time in a much more useful way, because now I think, oh, look at all the time I wasted prior to becoming a mum. Secondly, even my confidence, I find that I'm much more confident, strangely enough, just because, I've seen myself sort of look after these children and do things I never thought I was capable of. And the added element of even work, from a work perspective, I just find that I'm a bit more confident about asking for what I want. And I think it's just that journey of being a mum and seeing yourself play that pivotal role in a little person's life. You realize that you're much more capable than you thought. But I'd love to know from your perspective, the opportunities here for women, maybe as they juggle a professional career and motherhood. I mean, are there sort of findings that you've come across that is like a positive, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a couple thoughts. One is that one thing I talk about is the leadership lessons of parenthood. I think women don't recognize this, or fathers too, right?
Okay.
Like all of the stuff that's happening at home is relevant to your career if we can take the time to hone in on it, right? So I talk about the 5 Ps. So one of them is the kind of growth in people skills, right? Like empathy, connection. That's some of the neural network shifts that I was talking about earlier. That's an incredibly important and valuable skill at work. Those are those kind of soft skills, the leadership skills that are harder to teach, and you learn as a parent, right? You become more empathic. So that's a huge one. Another one is processing skills, right? So how quickly you can kind of take in information and make sense of it. I use the analogy that as a parent, you're always drinking from the fire hose, right? Like you have a kid and all of a sudden there's just information coming at you nonstop, and you have to figure out pretty quickly what's important and what's not. How am I going to act? What am I going to do? We want people who can process information quickly at work, right? That is a benefit in our workplaces. So here's another skill that you bring. The third one is that productivity, what you, Tiffany, were just talking about, right? Like there's that old saying, if you want something done, give it to a working mother, because we will just get it done. If we have 30 seconds, we'll do it in 30 seconds. And so, I think you start to learn how to really quickly prioritize, how to let go of what doesn't need to get done, and how to focus on kind of the most important pieces to move a project forward. Again, really, really helpful at home and at work. Another one that I like to talk about is project management. This is always, I think when you become a parent, you are project managing all the time, whether you realize it or not, right? Because you are having the big picture of your values as a parent and what you're trying to do, and also all of the small steps to get there. I use the analogy of taking your kids to the park or the beach. It's not summer right now, right? But who has nap time when. You have to plan around that. You've got to make sure you have the sunscreen and the snacks and account for the traffic and diaper changes, and then you have to schlep all this stuff to the beach and make sure your children don't drown while they're there or eat too much sand, and make sure everyone gets home, right? Doing all of that as a parent is a project management experience. And
Tiffany's smiling. She's just been on holiday to Spain with 2 kids.
Yeah. Making sure they don't eat too much sand, right? They can eat some sand because
it's inevitable. I had one of my kids who just would eat it by the handful if I let him. So
yeah.
But and the last one is playfulness. And that's one that we don't always think about, but there's a lot of fascinating research on playfulness as a really positive psychological variable, because it creates cognitive flexibility and resiliency and problem solving. And our kids can bring that out in us, right? Like, you have to get playful to be able to convince a toddler to do anything. And so you build that muscle that, again, then you can take to work, right? So there are all these huge things that you're growing in and learning as a parent that are kind of happening behind the scenes. And when we pull that intentionally into the workspace, you can really actually show up even better than before.
So it's about using those skills that you've developed as a parent, but also is there a piece that you do with the women you work with around how you convey those skills to people? Say you've had a career gap and you're trying to go back to work, how you communicate the stuff that you have learned while you were a parent and why that's an asset to your workplace, rather than, I think we're expected to turn it back at the workplace unchanged from motherhood and have to present like that, when actually we need to get employers to realize these benefits that you're talking about.
Yeah. No, I definitely do, right? Some of what we will, especially if you're coming back after a pause, a pause can be a career accelerator rather than a career detriment. Again, if we make sure to frame it that way. And so it is that similar idea of saying, let's take all of what you learned, let's name it, let's put a label on it, and then frame it for your workplace. And I really try to work with workplaces to recognize that too, right? And so if I'm doing workshops or training on why we should be supporting working parents, or why we should be taking seriously women in particular, but anyone that's taken a career pause, I talk about these same kind of skills so that they recognize the value too, so that there isn't that bias or assumption of, oh, there's a 9-month or 2-year or whatever gap on this resume, we're not even going to look at it, to, oh, there's a lot of really helpful stuff happening in that period. Let's give this person a fair shot.
So if there are clearly upsides to being a mom and it's clearly an advantage, where do you think we're all going wrong here then? Is it the messages that women are getting about motherhood, or where are we going wrong in the gap between this obvious growth that opportunities, and it actually been evidence in the world and in the workplace?
I think that's such a good question, right? And I think a huge part of it is the messaging, right? I think that there is a belief out there that motherhood shrinks your ambition and it distracts you from your work. I think that is the kind of unconscious bias, if not conscious bias, that people are walking around with. And what I have found is that is fundamentally untrue. I believe that motherhood grows your ambition, just not perhaps in the way that people necessarily define ambition, right? Motherhood gives you clarity. It gives you more breadth. Your ambition for time and space and connection become larger. The other piece I've seen is that assumption that it changes your interest, or that you become, you prioritize work less. And, Phoebe's done some great research over the past couple of years with their clients who are all really kind of high performing, high intensity careers, law, finance, these areas where it is particularly challenging to be a mother and hold that line of work. And, one of the things they found was only 15% of women said that their interest in their careers decreased after motherhood, which is a pretty small percentage. It's not a shift in interest, it's a shift in bandwidth or relative importance. And they all indicated that they want to show up as their best selves at work, that they want to continue to be high performers. They just need more support to get there. And so that's the other piece that's missing, right? Is that comprehensive support, particularly from the workplace, around flexibility and not having these biases and better communication skills, and ideally childcare support if a workplace can do it, where if we can get these structural supports in place, then I think women will also feel more confident. Because right now, so many women are saying it's a me problem. And it's not a me problem, right? It's not an individual problem. It's a big picture. It's a systemic, it's a comprehensive issue that we're not actually addressing.
And, you know, we've so definitely found that, you know, every single person we've spoken to for the podcast so far, they've said it looks like everyone else has got, and I think people don't want to, it's a bit taboo to admit to the fact that it's difficult because you think everybody else is juggling it, managing it, doing it perfectly. They're putting all of their pretty pictures of their wonderful weekend out on Instagram. You think, and that's why people think it's me. Why can everyone else manage this? Why can't I? So I think that the kind of work that you're doing by talking to people as well, I think it's demystifying the fact that everyone's finding it tough. It's hard because it's hard. And I think, you know, you're writing a book at the moment, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's about having it all.
Well, and it's about the kind of I've called it the ambition paradox. And it is exactly this idea, right? That it feels like on the outside that we cannot be a working mother, that we can't be ambitious and have children. We can't, that there's kind of, we've painted ourselves into a corner, and that the solution is both the systemic stuff that I've talked about and some internal stuff around usually socialized people pleasing and perfectionism, where we've kind of created these belief systems internally that we can't disappoint others, that we can't speak up, that we have to do everything perfectly. And so that it is this kind of multi-pronged approach to the problem, rather than saying, oh, just go meditate and your life will be better. I mean, that might help, but that's only a drop in the bucket when there's all of these other things to address. And I think that one of the big things that inspired me to start writing it is exactly that feeling that so many women have of it's a me problem, right? I'm alone in this struggle. And it's also why I love doing group work, because when I get a group of women together and we work on the problem as a group, there's so much camaraderie and there's so much validation of everybody is struggling with this, and we're going to kind of find our footing together. You know, one of the things I found time and time again is that even people who are reluctant to do groups, really, like, the group dynamic is actually the most important part of their experience when they work with me in a group setting. Yes, I can coach them on a lot of different things and teach skills, and that's really, really important. But those connections with other mothers are actually the thing that kind of really helps get them to believe that it's not just them, and accept that and kind of really internalize that, and then build their confidence from there.
That's a good point. And I think that's what we found in Ambition. I think Ambition for me has been some sort of therapy, actually.
Yeah.
Don't tell anyone, but yeah. Just this idea of, because I was shocked. I was just shocked about how much juggle there was. I mean, we've recently been on holiday, and even packing for holiday kind of I felt like I was going to have some sort of anxiety. It was just, it was like you're going on holiday, not a job interview, but I felt like that. My heart was like beating really fast. The idea of packing, and then the idea of, you know, being out of work for a few days, what if I fall behind? But then I realized that everyone goes through it. I don't think that's abnormal.
You messaged me, didn't you, to say, is it normal to feel this stressed about going on holiday?
We're going on holiday, you know. So I think, like you said, and I found out what we've done with Ambition is we've almost kind of we're looking behind the curtains a bit and seeing that other women with professional careers are also juggling the same. And I think Ambitions helps us to kind of normalize our own experiences, and it's been really useful seeing that, because it almost makes it feel like, oh, it's not just me. But I think I'd love to know, are there any other advice that you will give for maybe other women who are just trying to I suppose, get to this place of acceptance that it's not just them. Is there any advice that you give about finding a community or finding a way to appreciate that it's not just them? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously finding a community is a huge part, but defining that pretty broadly, right? Because we're not all in a place that we can just find a mom's group that clicks. Because it is, a group online, or, social media can be tricky, but sometimes there can be really amazing supports that you get and validation through social media. Again, you have to be kind of careful about who you follow. Certainly joining groups like mine, and there are other kind of working mom groups of different levels of depth and connection that you can join. And I think a big part of, I think that's why I talk so much about perfectionism too, because I think there's so much perfectionism when it comes to motherhood. People don't always realize that that's what's happening, right? There's a little bit of like, oh, I'm not a perfectionist. I can get an A-. I don't need an A+. That's fine. But there's still a lot of black and white thinking around success and failure, right? I can get an A-, but a B, that might as well be an F. Like I can't do that, right? And I think so many of us maybe grew up with that mindset a bit academically, but then we become parents and there is no grade. And we care so much, right? Like I think that's underneath it all, is just that we want to be perfect parents for our kids, right? We want them to have the best parenting that they can possibly have. And the reality is there's no such thing as a perfect parent, that most of us are making it up as we go along. If there was a perfect way to be a parent, there would not be 3,000 books on the subject. There'd only be one book, and we'd all just follow it like some sort of Bible. And even if we were perfect parents, we'd actually be doing our kids a disservice, right? Psychologically speaking, our kids need good enough parenting. And that's not 95% either, right? We're talking about being responsive most of the time, half of the time, 75% of the time, not 100% of the time. And if perfectly responsive all the time, they'd be in for a very rude awakening when they got into the rest of the world, right? And so when we fall short as a parent, we give our kids the opportunity to learn what a repair is, right? And what it feels like to have someone say sorry and to fix that and to try again. And that's all actually really wonderful role modeling for them. So I think if we can recognize externally, but by connecting with others, but also starting to work on kind of some self-compassion and internally shifting that need for perfectionism, that there's so much growth there.
Yeah, because I think we talked when we met with you before about how we're basically doing the same amount of parenting. Well, we're doing more parenting than people were in the 70s when they were stay-at-home mums, but we're working a full-time job at the same time as providing all of that sort of, need to do a craft activity, need to do baking, need to do all of this sort of thing. I did some painting with my son at the weekend. We painted some little Christmas trees, and 5 minutes into it, I was thinking, why did we start this? There was mess everywhere. And we did the craft and we enjoyed it, but I thought, I'm so glad he does most of this activity at nursery, and I lean into stuff that I enjoy and I'm good at, rather than turn my house into a disaster to provide him with that experience.
I think that's such a great example, right, of trying to show up as the parent you are and accept yourself for that, and not be what you think you're supposed to be. I mean, I love to cook. And I will cook with my kids, but I honestly don't love to cook with them, right? Like it's not stressful to me.
Oh, they're not listening.
That I do find, like, for me to do art and have art make a mess is fine, but the flour everywhere, it drives me crazy. So I just don't do it. I think that they'll learn to cook eventually. We'll figure it out, but I'm not going to beat myself up for not enjoying that task. It's not a life or death sentence here. We're just talking about, cooking. And again, I'll do it sometimes with them and kind of mentally get prepared for the mess. And a lot of times I don't, and that's okay. And so to be able to say, these are the parts of motherhood that I'm going to lean into and enjoy, and I'm not going to do things that social media tells me that I'm supposed to be doing simply because it tells me I'm supposed to be doing it. That's not actually what makes or kind of a good or bad motherhood experience.
Let's talk more about I think when we spoke, there was a couple of themes that you mentioned that you're finding from your work. You mentioned the couple across, number one, women feel like they're failing in their dual role. Talk more, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. I think one of the things that's very consistent is that women feel, especially mothers, working mothers, feel like they're failing at everything, right? There's this sense of, I cannot be the perfect mother and I cannot be the perfect kind of employee, and therefore I am failing. And it gets back to that black and white thinking about success and failure we were talking about earlier. And so they just walk around feeling like they're crap at everything. And it is incredibly sad, and it kind of robs them of being able to find any joy in it or find see the places where they are doing well. And I think, again, it goes back to the problem is societal, that our expectations of motherhood have escalated and escalated and escalated, right? To your point, we are spending more, as working mothers, we're spending more time, quality time with our children than at-home mothers were in the 70s. And so we need to recognize that these expectations are crazy, right? At this point, you are supposed to be perfectly emotionally regulated at all times. Sign your kids up for 400 activities, but don't overschedule them because they also need free time, right? Do all the arts and crafts, let them have freedom, but don't let them have any kind of unsupervised time unless something bad happened to them, right? It's like the speech from the Barbie movie, you cannot win. And the more we recognize that these expectations are just, have escalated to such epic proportions that they're impossible standards, then the more we're able to let go and tune inwards to, like, what do I expect of myself? What do I need? How do I define showing up as a good mother? And similarly at work, how do I show up as an employee in a way that feels aligned for me? How do I show up at work in a way that is meaningful and also recognizes my capacity and healthy boundaries and all of those things?
What about the idea of having it all? Because I know you said there was a theme there as well.
Yeah, I think that the redo we need on right. The problem is, for many of us today, we were raised in this kind of era of have it all. Like, you can have it all. You can work and have a family. And I do believe that you can have both of those things, just maybe not in the way that you expect. Right? You can't have it all in kind of the glossy magazine version. You can have it all if you redefine for you what having it all is. And if that's aligned with your values and your own belief systems, and it's defined internally rather than externally. And that's the really important shift that a lot of women have to make.
I reckon that's hard, because I think like you said, it's just because there's so much, was a lot of stimulus out there, like especially with social media, because we're constantly have a front row seat at everyone's lives. So it's hard to then kind of take a step back, and actually it's hard to know what you want, because we're so bombarded with everybody else. So we almost feel like we want everything because you see that,
well, and women are so socialized to not get into their own wants, right? Like, from the day we show up in the world as women, we are told to be small, to not have wants, to be quiet, to be the good girl, to sit still and raise your hand and accommodate everybody else's needs, right? I mean, it is the air that we breathe. Yeah. I find so many times that, women who I'm working with don't even recognize it, right? They have no idea. I mean, they maybe know in theory, but the reality of that, they haven't kind of tuned into. And so to say, what do you want, feels like such a big question. They're like, I don't even know what I want to eat for dinner. How do I know what I want with my life? Like, this is so far removed from my experience. I've forgotten how to ask that question. And so one of the ways that I really work with women is to say, okay, first, we have to name all that other stuff. We have to put down all of those external expectations. What did what does your own mom want for you? What does culture say you're supposed to want? What does the Instagram, star that you follow say you're supposed to want? What's the Pinterest board version? And let's label that and put it all aside, kind of like cleaning out your closet, right? Take everything out, put it on the bed, label it, what fits, what doesn't, and only keep the things that fit. only keep the things that actually feel aligned for you, then you can start asking yourself that question of what do you want? And even then it's still hard, and you have to usually start small, right? To tuning in, what do I actually want for dinner? Like what do I want to do this weekend, as opposed to what do I want to do with my life? It's almost like you have to build back that muscle again of naming your want before you can possibly go after it.
So it sounds like there's a real piece of work for people to do on that self-reflection, that understanding of yourself, and practicing putting yourself first sometimes as well. And I think we talked last time, we're almost out of time for our conversation, but we talked last time about, I think I asked, what, in the home, how do you have a more equal relationship, and where's that kind of disconnect coming between women and men? And you made me see that in a completely different light last time when we talked to you. You said that men are doing more than they saw their fathers do. So women are still needing them to do more because they're not doing 50%, but they are doing at least 50% more than they saw their own dads do. And so there's a gap there about understanding, and I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that before we finish.
Yeah, and I do think this relates to kind of that naming your wants and your needs and your boundaries, right? Because that is really, really hard for us as women. And I think we are kind of culturally working on that. It's where I, love bringing in Eve Rodsky's work from Fair Play. But what I think is happening right now is the gap that you just said, right? If my spouse is really, really, really involved and his dad was not at all, then he's saying, well, look, I'm doing so much better. And maybe he's doing 30% and I'm still doing the other 70, or sometimes the dynamic is that the spouse is helping a lot, but it's still viewed as helping, and mom is still doing the mental load, right? Is holding what needs to be done and kind of serving as the CEO of the family in that role. And that's the gap that we're all, I think, trying to work on filling through education and individual work with couples around communicating what needs to be done and really handing those tasks off. And it's complicated, right? Because it involves both people's background stories, both people's background expectations, and it involves a lot of communication. And it's changeable, but it is hard. And I love to do that work both with couples, but also, again, another place where I can come in through organizations and teach fair play concepts, because I think one of the things that's really important in supporting working mothers is equity at home, right? Because if we're taking on the vast majority of work at home, that actually makes it harder for us to show up in our careers than men. And so when we can make it more equal at home, that frees up space mentally, physically, time-wise, to show up at work and kind of lean in a bit more there.
Love it. Finally, do you have any books that you would recommend, or are there any kind of research or people that you think could bring more to this conversation that perhaps our listeners can check out in their free time as well?
Oh my goodness, so many, and yet now I'm on a blank. But I mean, a fair play is a great one, just in terms of following up on what we were just talking about.
Okay.
For women that have taken a pause, a new one coming out in January is The Power Pause. Neha, the author, is a wonderful wealth of resource. They can check her out also at Mother Untitled. And it's an entire book looking at kind of stepping back or stepping out of careers and then back in. And she and I spoke a lot in her research for her book about how to do the stepping in part. But I think her whole message is the value of caretaking and showing up at home, and, making sure to name how important that is. And so that's another one. If people are interested in talking about the big picture systemic issues and motherhood shame and blame, I'm just diving into a book by Devin Price, and I believe it is Unlearning Shame is the title. A bit of a bigger, deeper read from a social psychologist, but he's great. So that's another one that people can check out if they want to take on something meatier in their reading journey.
Thank you so much. And you've honestly blown my mind with the bit about fair playing at home, because I think it's allowed me to have a lot more in the way of compassion for men around that, but also I've always been of the mindset of, well, I shouldn't have to ask, but I'm understanding why maybe asking people to do stuff and pushing them in that direction to do that is where the communication comes in and is where we need to go, rather than thinking, why do I need to ask about this? It's putting me in a better place to understand where that kind of gap is and how I can tackle that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always the thing with any change, right? Is it's going to come as a process. It doesn't happen overnight, and that process might be a little circuitous and a little bit back and forth. And it's always going to be better if we can communicate through it about our needs and express them and tolerate as women having those needs and putting them out there, which is really, I think, challenging for many of us.
Love it. Where can our audience find you online?
Yeah, they can always check out my website, which is drannwelsh.com, but I'm also super active on LinkedIn, which is also Dr. Ann Welsh. And I love to chat with people there, comment, I post on most days, and I love to chat with people in the DMs. So that's another great way to find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Ann. It's been amazing.
It's been fab. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.